Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second ever PST live stream. My name is Devon Struthers. I'm the Product Service and Support Coordinator for Psychology Software Tools, and I will be your presenter for this afternoon, or morning, I guess. As always, if you guys would like to leave me any comments, feel free to send any comments my way. If you have any questions, how did you do that? What are you doing? Anything like that.
I won't start again. I just booted up for me.
Oh.
No,
Well.
you're good, actually.
Oh. Okay, cool. Just got some notes from our technical advisor here. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, would like to comment on anything like that, please feel free to leave me some comments. I'd be happy to go over anything, explain anything a little more. And most importantly too, if you have something you'd like to see in our next live stream, we're going to hold these weekly now on every Thursday at this time. If you'd like to see anything in the future, so if you have a paradigm you're really passionate about, or I really want to integrate my ePrime with touch screens or something like that, feel free to leave us a comment. I'd be happy to kind of edit these webinars to meet whatever you guys want. So what we're going to talk about today is building an IAT, or an implicit association task. For those of you familiar with an implicit association task, this is a pretty common paradigm in psychology. For those of you not familiar, what it does is it allows the use of reaction time variables, or reaction time data, to see if participants have any sort of biases towards one thing or another. In this instance, we are going to pair positive and negative words with self and other words. For those of you who have access to our experiment library, this is going to look very similar to what we have in our experiment library. For those of you who are unaware of our experiment library, just go to support.pstnet.com. We have a really good experiment library there, and today I'm going to be recreating basically what that IAT is in there. I'm going to be adding a few new ePrime 3 features, so there's going to be some buttons involved, things like that. And this live stream today does assume some basic knowledge of ePrime. I'm not going to be going over everything in depth, but if you find out that there's anything that you're missing, that you'd like to see more about, or something I gloss over just way too fast, go ahead and leave me a comment. I'd be happy to explain a little bit more about that there. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do with the IAT is I'm actually going to make an instruction screen. The instruction screen is basically just going to let participants know what's going on in the experiment. And since this is ePrime 3, I'm going to add a button object because why not? So to do that, what I'm going to do is double click on the session proc. This is just my procedure object. It's in ePrime 3 by default. The first thing I'm going to make on the session proc is going to be my instruction slide. So I'll take a slide from the toolbox, go ahead and drag and drop it to the first object here in the procedural timeline. I'm going to rename it from slide 1 to instructions. Again, as a general rule, I like to always name my slide objects, or any of my objects actually, so their name matches their function. There's going to be a few times in this particular presentation that I might not necessarily do that, and we'll go over that a little later. But for now, let's double click on instructions to open it here. And I'm just going to make some pretty quick text-based instructions. I'm going to take a slide text sub-object from our possible list of sub-objects here. I'm going to resize that just a little bit so it'll fit all the text I want. If I need to resize it later, I'll show you guys how to do that. And I'm just going to give a very basic description of the task to users. All right, so my instructions are just the task you are now presented with will be a reaction time task. Please respond as quickly as possible to all of the words that you see. Press continue to begin. Obviously, since it's implicit association task, you don't want participants to know that it's going to be an association task. You just want participants to know that reaction time and speed is paramount in this particular study. So what I'm going to do then is I'm actually going to resize this because it looks all kind of scrunched up here. As I mentioned in the last streaming video, if you just leave these slide text objects at default, it's going to look like all of the words are kind of smushed together there. If you double click on them, that's more how they're going to appear at runtime. But it's still kind of squished in at the top, so I want to resize that just a little bit. I can do that either by drag and dropping either corner or the middle or top here of this slide text sub object. Or I can go into my properties page here and change the frame to whatever I want. I'm actually going to change the X and Y properties, which represents where this slide text sub object is located on the screen. I'm going to change it to center and center, just so it actually goes in the middle of the screen here. And height and width, I'm just going to change to 75 and 75 just to keep consistency. Go ahead and click OK. All right, so now it says press continue to begin. I don't have any response objects on here, so it's time to make one. One of the newer features of ePrime3, for those of you who are new to ePrime3, is a button object, and I'm actually going to have participants respond that way. So I'm going to take a slide button sub-object, and I'm going to add it to the very bottom center of the screen here. Right now it just says button. I want it to say continue because I have it set to continue. So let's dive into some of the properties of the slide button sub-object. You can get there by selecting button 1 from the list of sub-objects here and clicking on the sub-object properties page icon just to its right. Its name in this instance I'm going to change from button 1 to continue just to make it a little more descriptive for myself. And if you look down here, responses, it's going to say responses reported by slide button shall report as, and then in squiggly brackets, continue for the rest property. That's what we want. If we ever want to change that, so instead of continue, even though this button's name continue, if I want it to report a 1, for example, I just do this. And now my .rest value for this slide object is going to be 1 instead of continue. But for this instance, I'm just going to keep it as continue since this slide isn't necessarily important for logging data, but the data is nice to have. I'm going to check on the frame tab. This is pretty much exactly where I want it to be. I don't think I need to edit anything on the frame tab. The important one here is theme. In this instance, I'm actually going to just change the text on the slide button sub-object from button to continue. And if I click apply and OK, you're going to watch the button update. Now if you take a look here, the word continue is kind of running over into the little bevels that we have on the slide object here. I don't think it looks very great, so we can either change that by resizing it like that, or again, similar to the slide text sub-object, if you go into the frame tab, you can resize it using these properties here. These can be set to either percentages of the screen, which is honestly what we recommend. They can be set to exact pixel values, or if you like, they can be set to attribute references, so like the width, for example. But I liked it where it was at 18%, so I'm just going to keep it there. And there we go. So now that I have my button and I have my slide text, the only thing I need to change now is just the duration input properties. So let's go ahead and click on the click on the properties page in the upper left-hand corner. Click on the duration input tab. I would like participants to read this for as long as they want until they have acknowledged that they've read this and moved on, clicking my little continue button there. So I'm going to change duration from 1000 milliseconds to infinite. I'm going to change data logging in this instance from none to time audit only, just so I get some data for this object. I'm going to click apply just to make sure that those changes happen. I like to hit apply a lot. It's kind of a personal tick. You totally don't have to all the time. And then I'm actually going to add a slide button input mask. So if you click add, you can go ahead and click on button. It's going to add that, and I'm going to keep it at its default right now of this little star. This star is kind of a placeholder. It's a wildcard symbol, and it just means that any press on any button is going to advance the screen. In this instance, we only have one button, but what I could do if I really wanted to was type the word continue, and it's going to focus specifically on that continue button. But I'm going to keep it back to its default. I'm going to go ahead and click apply and OK to save those changes. And let's keep going. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a list object. This one is going to be my block list. Block lists in this instance are actually going to be way more important than they were in the previous live stream that we've done. So in the previous live stream, the purpose of the block list was mostly just to kind of differentiate between our practice trials and our critical trials. And it's a good thing to have in an experiment, but honestly it was a little more contrived. It was me kind of forcing purpose for the block list. In this instance, the block list is actually going to be very important because each block of our experiment is basically going to be a trial type. Our trial type in this instance is going to be the type of stimuli to which the participants are responding, and the stimuli to which they're responding, so self or other, or positive or negative in the case of the paradigm, is going to be housed entirely on the block list itself, including the order in which they're presented, so left side of the screen, right side of the screen. So as I edit some of the properties of this block list, it's going to look like it's going to make our experiment in this window here grow exponentially. And you'll see that at the end, this is going to look like a really big experiment, But we're going to set it up in such a way that it actually takes very little processing power and very little time for E prime to kind of parse through all of the objects, because we're going to do a lot of referencing of the same objects over and over and over. So if we go into list 1, I'm going to actually rename this to block list. There we go. And for those of you following along at home, I am renaming either by right-clicking, clicking F2, or just clicking on it and clicking, or just selecting F2 from the keyboard there. So the first procedure I'm going to make is just called block proc 1. Standard prompts, it does not exist. Would you like to create it? I'm going to click yes. Would I like to make the default value for newly created levels? I'm going to select no, because this block list is going to be pretty diverse. So as I mentioned before, the stimuli to which participants are responding, the whole like right side of the screen, left side of the screen kind of things, those are going to be housed or manipulated on the block level. So every trial that I have is going to have the same word in the left side of the screen and the same word on the right side of the screen. And those are going to change per block of our experiment. So in that instance, I need to make 2 attributes on this block list. One attribute that is going to be for the word that'll appear on the left side of the screen. The other attribute that'll be for the word that appears on the right side of the screen. So I'm going to click on this Add Multiple Attributes button, and I will select 2. I'm going to rename attribute 1 to left word, and I'm going to rename attribute 2 to right word. The way that I have this set up right now is I would like left word to obviously show up on the left side of the screen, right word to show up on the right side of the screen. And in this instance, my left word is going to be self. So in order for participants to categorize words related to the self, they have to press a button that I select on the keyboard, and it'll appear on the left side of the screen. And the right word is going to be other. So if it is related to other, it'll appear on the right side of the screen up in the right-hand corner here. So now that I have this part of my block list made, this is going to grow a little bigger later, but let's just do this first part, and then I'll show you how copying and pasting and adding additional procedures is going to be pretty easy once we get this out of the way. So once we have our left word and right word set, this is going to apply to every trial in this particular list object. So let's jump into trial or block proc 1. I'm going to make a list, and this is just going to be called list 1 for now. We'll rename it later. But this procedure is going to be called trial proc. Again, I'm going to make this, I'm going to actually create this as a procedure object, and I am going to make this the default value for newly created levels. Because unlike block list 1, where the procedure is going to change every block, in our list 1 object, trial proc is going to be the same for every instance of the stimuli that we have here. So I'm going to click add attribute here, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make some of our independent variables. And in this instance, it's going to be the stim word. So this is where I house all of the words to which participants are responding. In this one, since I have in my block list here, you don't have to jump around with me, I'm just kind of pulling it up on screen to demonstrate. In our block list here, I have self and other. So obviously, this list 1 is going to contain words related to either the self or the other. So in this instance, I want to make a stim word of me. And I'm actually going to make, I think, we'll add a couple more levels here. You can either add multiple levels by clicking on this add level and just clicking on it repeatedly, or clicking add multiple levels here and selecting the number of levels you want to add, so 2 or something like that. So my words, in this instance, I'm going to make all of the self words first and all the other words after that. So me, self, my, and then self. I'll keep these all lowercase. And then mine. And then all of the other words will be not me, other, another, person, and then I'm going to add one more just for others. There we go. So now I have an equal number of words related to the self and words related to the other. So 6 and 6. Or 5 and 5. That one, because math. All right, so now that I have the myself and others, these have an objectively correct response. Either the word is a self word or it is another word. So I'm going to make another attribute here called correct response. And in this instance, I would like participants to respond with either P or Q on the keyboard. If the word is going to appear on the left side of the screen here, as determined by my block list, so the self words, their participants are going to press Q. If it appears on the right side of the screen as determined by my block list, they're going to hit P. So I will do Q for these, and I will do P for the remaining ones. I just typed those out. You can also copy and paste those if you like. There's a lot of different ways to get multiple instances of the same cell in these list objects here, but I just kind of copied and pasted, or kind of entered each one individually. So now if you take a look, we're set to sequential selection, so it's going to run through all of the self words and all of the other words. That's not really what we're looking for here, especially the way the paradigm's set up. So let's go ahead and change this from sequential to random. So we will click on the properties page here at the top of the slide object, or list object, sorry. Click on selection and change order from sequential to random. Go ahead and click apply and OK, and now ePrime is going to randomize all of these stimuli, and the correct response of either P or Q is going to be kind of varied there. So let's go ahead and click on the trial proc so we can actually start making these procedures here. So in the trial proc, the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to make a fixation object. So we'll click on text display 1. Just grab that from our toolbox and add it to our procedural timeline, and I will of course rename this to fixation. There we go. And we'll go ahead and double click on it to open it in the workspace. And the fixation is obviously just going to be a little fixation cross in the middle of the screen. It's going to be similar to the last live stream we did. This part isn't going to look any different. Like I mentioned before in the last live stream too, even though it shows up in the top center here and the top left in this text object, since our align horizontal and align vertical are both set to center, this is actually going to appear in the very center of the screen. And our duration input is going to be fine. I'm just going to change data logging from none to time audit only here. And we'll click apply and OK. And now we have our fixation object. This is really all we need to do here. We don't really need to do too much else. So we'll move on from fixation to our stimulus object. So we'll take slide, add it to just after our fixation, and I'm going to rename this one to stim display. And hit enter. And we take a quick drink of water. All right, so now that we have our stim display, I'm gonna go ahead and double click on it to open it in our eStudios workspace here. So what I need to do in this is I need to reference 3 different things. I need to reference our stim word to display the word in the center of the screen. And I need to reference our left word and right word. Those are gonna obviously show up on the left-hand side of the screen and the right-hand side of the screen. So let's go to our stim display object. And I'm gonna make a slide text sub object in the very center of the screen. It's a little off now, we'll fix that later. But we're gonna double click on the slide text sub object and delete the word text. And then I am going to make an attribute reference right now to stimword. What you see now is a trib sense. If you have ePrime 3, this is definitely something that you have access to. If you have ePrime 2.0, an earlier version of ePrime 2.0, you might not have access to this. It is a professional only feature for newer versions of ePrime 2.0. But what it allows you to do is just select what you want, one of the properties, click on it, and it makes a properly formatted attribute reference in the middle of the slide object. And I'm just going to change its location to make sure that it's in the middle of the screen here. X and Y are going to be center, obviously. And there we go. Now all I need to do is make reference to my left and right objects. So if I click on another slide text sub object, bring it in the top left-hand corner of the screen, and make another one and put it in the top right-hand corner of the screen, you should be good. And similar to stimword, I'm just going to use a trib sense to quickly and easily reference these attribute references. So this one's going to be left word, and this one is going to be right word. Whoops. That is the wrong attribute reference. There we go. So I have left word, I have right word, and I have stim word. These are all going to be filled out exactly correctly because they are in my list objects already. So now all I need is to reference that correct answer and to make a duration for this. So we'll click on the properties page here, click on the duration input tab. I'm going to make this 3 seconds for participants to respond because I emphasize speed in my instructions here. I want participants to actually know that there's a time limit to this. I'm going to change my data logging, those words, to standard. And I'm going to change my devices, and I'm going to add a keyboard device. This is going to allow me to have participants respond using the keyboard in this particular slide object. My allowable in this instance is going to be set to P and Q, or Q and P. And my correct is going to be a reference to that correct response attribute that I made on my list 1 object. There we go. I'm going to click apply and OK to save these changes. And then the last thing I have to do is I have to make a feedback display, and that'll be right here. My feedback display is just going to let participants know if they respond either correctly or incorrectly to my stim display. Go ahead and click on the input object name in the properties page. I go into this feedback object in a lot more detail in our last stream. If you guys want to take a look, it's definitely a pretty good one. Go ahead and click on the properties page there. Click on duration input. Duration is going to be fine. It's just going to be at 1500. We don't need to have the participants see if they're correct or incorrect any longer than that. So just on my general tab, I'm going to change the input object name to stim display. And that's all I need. So at this point, what we have is one trial. Oh, what I did there is I clicked window and clicked close all just to close all the windows. I kind of like to keep my little workspace here pretty neat and orderly. So what I recommend now is saving and running the experiment at this point. I recommend that because what happens is we have these little chunks of the experiment, and before we start expanding the experiment to something much, much bigger, I would like to make sure that each individual chunk of the experiment works as well as it possibly can. So let's go ahead and save the experiment first. And I'm just going to save this onto the desktop here, or we'll just keep it in my experiments. And I'm just going to call this one IAT webinar. Go ahead and click save. And we'll go ahead and practice this, or just do a little quick practice run of this. You can run this in windowed mode. That's what I recommend for any tests. I'm going to keep this at 4 times normal speed because ePrime's going to basically run a test at it, and I'm going to click on run in windowed mode. I would like to see all of my objects here. So I'm going to make sure that all of these are checked. If, for instance, I don't want to run my instructions object, I can uncheck that. But I just want to see what it looks like. And I'm going to click test. Click OK. It's showing up on the other window over there. I'll bring it over. There we go. So this is that instruction screen that I made. Looks exactly how I want it. Continue button works fine. And this is ePrime just running through it as quickly as possible at 4 times its normal speed. I'm obviously not responding with the keyboard, so it's just saying no response detected. If I make a response, I obviously made an incorrect response. And if I open up, drag this over, if I open up my windowed mode, I can actually see some of the data that ePrime is going to log for each one of these objects. So this is like basically this window here is the compiled version of my script. And then if I took a look at this while my experiment was running, which, I mean, it was on the other window, I could see the data that was being logged as it was being logged. But I'm gonna click exit right now to get out of that. And now that I've ran the experiment, I realize I'm not really telling participants to respond with the P or Q keys at really any point. This just said respond as quickly as possible to all of the words you see, and then the stimuli start coming up. So that's probably a problem. Let's go ahead and fix that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have, at the very beginning of my list objects here, so just before the list displays, I'm going to have my instruction screen for that actual block of trials. So let's take a text display object and put it just before list. And this is going to be called block instructions. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this to open it. Give me 1 second to grab a quick drink of water. Voices. All right, cool. So now that I have my block instructions up, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to make some simple instructions. So if the word presented is related to and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make an attribute reference to my either right or left words. What this is going to do is not only is this going to tell participants what they're specifically going to be looking for, but it's going to make it relevant to each block of trials. So if the word presented is related to left word, so in this instance it's going to be the self, press Q. The word presented is related to, and then I'll make this one to right word, press P. And then I'm just going to have them press space to continue. just so at that point it gets their hands away from the mouse since they were using it to respond to the instructions, gets them by the keyboard so you don't have that kind of distance time in your first, the reaction time of your first stimuli. Press space to begin. What this also allows me to do is, since this is kind of generic block instructions, I can actually use these for every single block of my trial, and this left word and right word is just going to keep repeating, which is great. So I'm going to click on the properties page here, click on the duration input tab. Again, these are instructions, so I want them to display for an infinite duration. So I'll click on infinite, add a keyboard, and I will set my allowable from any to space. And I'm going to set my data logging to time audit only. Click apply and OK. And we're good. So now I'm going to run my experiment again just to see if it's what I want it to be. I'm going to run it at 1 times speed. Again, it's going to show up on the other screen here, but I will make that work. And I'll drag this over here. So task presented with is going to be a reaction time task, same instructions. This is perfect. See, now these are my block instructions. So I have my self and other instead of my 2 attribute references in there. I'm going to click space to begin. And I got that one wrong. Got that one right. So my feedback display is working. My stimuli are working. They're showing up correctly. This is exactly what I want now. And that's also the benefit of running your experiment in smaller chunks like this, is you can actually figure out little problems that you have, like, you know, hey, I'm missing an instruction screen, or maybe the instructions aren't clear enough. You can figure that out before your experiment balloons into something much, much bigger, and it becomes an actual bear to edit. So, you know, running your experiment in little segments like this is definitely something that we recommend. All right, looks like that all worked. I'm going to pull this up. And it looks like it's ending the experiment. So I'm going to go ahead and click exit to end. So now I have the bare bones, very basic most version of the implicit association task. But it's not a very good one because I'm only asking people to say either self or other. So let's start actually making this bigger. So go to my block list, and I'm going to add another level to this block list. This one's just going to be called Proctor II. And it's going to introduce the second part of our pairing of stimuli. This one is self and other. The next one is going to be positive words and negative words. So instead of self and other, this set of stimuli is going to be positive and negative. So I'll double click on my Proc II to open it in my experimental timeline here. And I'm going to make another list object. So instead of list 1, I'm going to make a list 2. Now what I could do, if I really wanted, is I could double click on list object and make everything from scratch. Or I could right click on my list 1, click copy, and then click paste in my Proc II here. It'll say the object you're pasting contains child object. Would you like to paste all the child objects in addition to the primary object? In this instance, I'm going to click yes. Or no, sorry, I'm going to click no. Because what's going to happen is it's going to keep my fixation, stimulus, and feedback object all the same because none of these need to change. But my list object is what's going to change. Obviously, instead of words related to myself and other, I would like positive and negative words. So I'm going to go ahead and type those out very quickly. So I'm going to make the positive words appear first. Those are going to be freedom, joy, love, peace, and happiness. And the negative words are going to be hatred, death, we're getting pretty dark, war, pain, and murder. Again, pretty dark with these words here. So then honestly, that's all we need to change in order for this to work. So E prime is automatically going to pull in our stim display object the left word and the right word for this block list here. It's going to pull positive and negative, and it's going to pull stim word and correct response. And since these are now associated with the correct response, since they're paired with the same thing, then we don't really need to change anything but the stimuli. I would like my block instructions to appear in this block. So to do that, all I do is just drag and drop. My block instructions are obviously going to be the same between the blocks since I have my left word and right word here. So I don't really need to change any of this stuff. So we're good. That is all we need to do to make an entirely new block of trials. So now, honestly, the rest of this experiment design is just going to be creating new block of trials related to the stimuli that we want. So we had self and other, positive and negative, So now we want to actually get at the implicit association. So we're going to start pairing these types of stimuli together. So the next one is going to be self or positive and other or negative. So we're going to add another list here, or another level here. Make it block Proc 3. It does not exist. I would like to create it. And this one is going to be self or other. And then this one, self or positive, not self or other. Self or positive, and then other or negative. And we're going to hit enter. There we go. So then similarly, we're going to open up block Proc 3. I'm going to drag and drop my block instructions so they get those instructions at the very beginning of the trial here. And then just copy. In this instance, you could either click copy here, or I just like the keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to click Control-C and then Control-V. I would not like to paste those child objects, and I'll have to reorder those things. So in this instance, I'm actually going to have to kind of conglomerate all of my stim words. So I have my words here for happy or good words or positive words, and I have my negative words here. All I need to do is add my self and other words. So instead of clicking this button and, or this button over and over and over again and manually typing these out, what I can do as a bit of a shortcut, and this will also kind of pair the correct responses together, is I can jump back into my list 1 object, which in this instance contains my self or other words, highlight both of these columns here, and click copy or Control-C on the keyboard, jump into my list 3, select the top leftmost cell, and click Control-V or paste, and it'll paste the correct stimuli along with the correct response into these two into these two columns of our list object. What this does is it allows us basically to be lazy, but to make E' experiments much faster. So instead of having to retype all of these out and, oh no, maybe there's a spelling error or a typo in myself and I just put my elf or something like that, this makes sure that these are all consistent among all of these trials. So now that we've made this, we're actually getting to the point where our experiment's starting to look a little bigger. So, like I would generally recommend, let's go ahead and run the experiment again just to see if this is something that we like. So make sure that this is all interacting correctly, make sure that this is getting the data that we want, those kinds of things. As I mentioned, it's important to kind of make sure that this is, logging data and interacting in the way that you want before it turns into a rather big thing. Because we have 2 other blocks to add to this, and it's already looking kind of big in the structure window. So go ahead and click Run Experiment. In this instance, since it is getting bigger, I'm going to run it at 4 times normal speed. But what I'm going to do, since I know that my first block works well, I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to set the weight in here to 0. This is just to demonstrate another possible troubleshooting method in E'. If you have an entire block of an experiment or a series of trials in a trial level list object that functions and you don't want to test, you can actually set the weight from 1 to 0. What this tells E' is that when it gets to this list object, it says, hey, don't run this row. And in this instance, this row is all of just the self or other words. So now E' is actually going to start at level 2, and it's going to run through my positive and negative words and my self or other words, or self/positive, other/negative words, is going to run through those, which is something we haven't tested yet. This window here, this test manager, you saw me click on this windowed mode object. I can get there that way. I can also get there using the test mode. In this instance, I'm just going to stick with windowed mode. I'm going to click test, and it's going to appear on my other monitor. Go ahead and drag that over. There you go. So we know this works. So positive and negative words, press space to begin. And I'm just going to quickly go through this. So if at any point I get to this, I'm at this point in my experiment, I'm like, all right, it works. I understand that it works. I don't need to see that it works anymore. I can actually pull up this screen, which is our experiment window while it's running. If you look here, here's some of the data that I'm collecting here. So I get my data file base name, my experiment version, my fixation onset delay. That's for this particular trial here, this is going to kind of let me know what the data that I'm logging right now looks like on the fly. So my stem word in this instance is joy. Joy showed up on the screen. Now my stem word is freedom. As you can see, freedom's on the screen. If at any point I want to like just stop the experiment and be like, okay, what does it look like right now? I'm going to go ahead and continue the experiment here. There we go. So I have self or positive, other or negative. If at any point I want to be like, what does the data look like right now? I can actually pause my experiment using this pause button, and I'll just comb through my data here. So my RT, 0. Obviously I haven't responded to this yet. Stem word is murder. You can see it on the screen. Subject is 1. So what this does is it allows you to see the data, but it also allows you to kind of troubleshoot on the fly what it's going to look like in your data file. And you can see that relation right away. So stem word is murder. It's right on the screen. So this is actually a really good kind of troubleshooting and kind of a learning tool here. So in this instance, I know self or positive, other, negative works. I obviously know that my positive and negative procedure works as well. I don't really need to keep going in order to say, okay, this works. So what I'm actually going to do is click this abort button. It's going to ask me what I'd like to abort the experiment. I'm going to click yes, and it's actually just going to get out of all of this. I'm going to get a runtime error. Obviously, it'll say experiment terminated by user. Of course it was. You just watched me do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to use this window here to kind of close all of these. Again, I like to keep this workspace pretty clean. So we're going to get rid of all of those. And it looks like my experiment's working. Now, one of the important things, if you ever make a change like this to your experiment in order to troubleshoot things faster, just make sure you undo it by the time you're done. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm actually going to add another condition. So right now I have self, other, positive, and negative. Now what I need to do is I actually need to change the order of these things. So I want to change other and self from the left side of the screen to the right side, or the self from left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, and the opposite for other. What this is going to do is it's actually going to kind of alleviate a response bias. So people are, at this point, after running 2 instances of trials like this, they're used to responding to any self words on the left side of the screen and any other words on the right side of the screen. And we're going to flip that to kind of get rid of that possible bias. So I'm going to add one more level. I'm going to call this one block Proc 4. Whoops. 4. There we go. It says it doesn't exist, but I like to create it. Of course, I'm going to create it. And like I mentioned, I'm just going to flip around my left and right word. So my right word in this instance is going to be other, and myself is going to be on the right. There we go. So from here on out, it just looks like exactly the same thing. I want to copy my list 1 object because it already has my list and reversed pairings of my correct answer and all of my stimuli. So I'm going to take list 1. I'm going to click copy, open up block Proc 4, click paste, and click yes. I'll go ahead and take a look at my block Proc 4. It has all of my trials correctly. It has my list 4 object. So I have all of my self words, all of my other words, but if you notice, these are reversed. So one thing I can do if I really want is I can cut using either the right click and click cut, or I can just cut using Control X, which is what I like, and then Control Paste. It'll change that, and then I just change these to P's. So now all of the self words are on the right, and they have to be responded to on the right. All of the other words are on the left and have to be responded to on the left. And that's all you have to do to make these changes. So even though this experiment is starting to look really complex, all of the edits that we've been making to balloon this out have been very, very minute. So just a matter of copying and pasting, changing one thing on a list object, things like that. It's just one of those ways that in ePrime you can end up making these really big, complex looking experiments for almost very minimal effort. The only thing I want to change about block Proc 4 then is I want to add my block instructions to it, obviously, because this is going to be pretty important here because it's going to be a reversal then. My left word is going to be the other, and my right word is going to be the self now. And then the only other thing that I need to do is just switch around these two. I need to make my other or negative on the left, and I need to make my self and positive on the right. I also want to change around these words too. So in this instance, self was paired with positive, other was paired with negative. I want to switch those two. So now self will be paired with negative, other will be paired with positive, and it'll just kind of help get at that that bias that they were experiencing a little bit more. So for instance, if you find participants generally view other people more negatively, the reaction time is going to be much faster here. And if people generally view other people more positively, the reaction time will be faster on this next set of trials. So I'm going to click Add Trial. I will change this to Block Proc 5. Again, I'll get the standard prompt. I would like to create it. My left word is going to be other or positive. And on the right will be self or negative. And I'm going to go ahead and double click on this. What it's going to do is it's actually going to resize this column. So I see position and not just half of the word. Or sorry, positive, not position. So I actually see just the entire word and not just part of it. Then I just have to make the exact same set of changes. I have to look at the block proc here. I have to add our block instructions as the first thing. All I did was just take it from the structure window, drag it and drop it. Another fun way to do this too, and I'll show you how to do that, is if you click on the browser window tab here down here, what the browser tab does is it actually shows you all of the E objects in your experiment in an alphabetical order. So instead of having to find them in your structure window and go, where did I put that? You can actually just see them all listed here. I'm actually just going to grab the block instructions from the browser tab and put it right there. Another useful method of the browser tab is if you find that you have one object that you'd like to display multiple times in a particular procedure, you actually can't do that if you just click copy and paste. So if I like copy block instructions and paste them, nothing really happens. But if I take block instructions from the browser object and put it here, I can actually make this one object show as many times as I want in a row. Of course, this is ridiculous and you never want to do this, but there are some instances where you're going to want multiple fixations in a procedure. So let's say in trial proc, I want fixation to come both before and after my stim display. If I go to move it by itself, it just changes that one instance of my fixation object. But if I hop into my browser window, I can put a fixation wherever I want, and in that instance, I won't have to make fixation 1. All right, so then all I want to do now is I want to go ahead and look at my list 3 object to copy and paste into my block proc, because in block proc 5. Because what I'm doing in block proc 5, if you look at my list object here, is I'm actually just doing the opposite of what my third block proc 3 is doing. Instead of self or positive and other and negative, I'm doing other and positive or self or negative. So I'm going to take my block list 3, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go to block proc 5 and paste it. I would not like to paste all the child objects. And I'm going to go ahead and take this object here and move it just to the left of my list 5. And then if I go in here, all I have to do is just change the association. So if we look in our block list, which I can actually just pull up here. There we go. Other and positive are on the left. Self and negative are on the right. So in list 5, other and positive are on the left. So we'll go into list 5 here. These are positive words. They're on the left. So they should be Q. That is correct. And then negative words are on the right, which is P, which is correct. Whoops. I'm actually going to close all these. I have a lot of windows open. There we go. Yep, negative words are going to be on the right. These words, these self words, if I look in my block list object, self words are going to be on the right this time. So I'm going to change these Q's to P's. And the other words are on the left, so these will be changed to Q. And again, this will be a random selection, and we will be in trial proc. So now I have my full crossing of possible self and other and positive and negative blocks here. I have all of my trials here set correctly and set exactly how I want. So I'm just going to run through the experiment in test mode one more time, just to make sure. I'm going to change the clock scaling up to 4. I'm going to click test. And I just want to take a look at this data file quick, just to make sure that it's logging exactly what I want. And I'll pull this over on this screen here. Continue. This is actually just going to go ahead and do auto response for me. It's running at 4 times normal speed. I'll occasionally chime in with a response just so I get some positive and negative values here, or some correct and incorrect values. There we go. This is also to test if I get any, if I get any possible errors in the experiment itself. So, self or positive or other negative, or any of the new trials that I made aren't spaced correctly, or they don't look the way I want them to look, or more particularly, it's is just to make sure I paired those P and Qs correctly. So if there's ever any instance where I was like, I entered P there for that block of trials and it should have been Q, I can actually test during this as well. So this is my flip-flop of the other and self. So now other's on the left, self is on the right. I'm just trying to get a nice cross-section of correct and incorrect answers here, just so our data looks a little better. And then other and positive, self or negative. All right, so that was the run of the experiment. So what I'm going to do is in this little window here, this experiment run window, I'm going to click exit to get out of the window. And as you can see, my data file is down here, this EDAT3. So I'm going to pop it open and make sure it looks like what I want it to look like. There we go. Takes a second to open sometimes. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at our data. So for those of you familiar with eDataAid, there's a lot of columns that, while they give really good information, they're not necessarily what we want right away. So in this instance, eStudio version doesn't matter to me. Block instructions, devices, keyboard, I know that. Session date, session time, those are going to be helpful for later if I want to see when a participant ran a particular task. But I mean, right now it just says today and right now, so I don't really need to see this. So to get the data looking like something that I want to see, I'm going to click Arrange Columns here. I'm going to click Remove All, and I'm going to look at the ones that I want. So in this instance, really all I'm interested in is that stim display. So what I could do is, since this is all in alphabetical order, I could just scroll down and find stim display, or if I type in the search bar here, this little character here is known as a wildcard character. So if, for instance, I want to look at all of my .resp values for everything in my experiment, I could actually just click .resp, and it'll highlight everything with the .resp value. In this instance, it's only 2. This looks like I have a stim display 1, which is the actual experiment design error in this instance, and I'm going to go back and fix. But I actually just want everything related to stim display. So if I do type stim display here, it's going to highlight everything related to stim display, which is exactly what I want. So I'm going to click add to add these back into my data file and click yes. And this is what I was looking for. Like I had mentioned, this is one of the reasons why I recommend running data files before, or just running even pilot data before doing your actual study, just to see what it even looks like in ePrime. So what I found after running is that I have my stim display objects exactly the way I wanted them. What I also have is this weird other set of objects called stim display 1. What this is basically going to do to me is it's going to mean that there's going to be one set of trials, and you can see them right here, where instead of having all of my data under the same column, I'm actually going to have a set of null values. And where I have that set of null values in my data file, I'm actually going to have a set of data for my stim display 1. So if I scroll over a little more, there's my data for stim display 1 where it's null here, and where I have data here, you're going to see that my stim display 1 displays almost entirely null. This is going to be a little messy for me to kind of clean up and for me to port over into this column. It's relatively easy to do by just copying and pasting, but any edits made to EDAT files, so example, if I want my onset to onset time to be 1, 2, 3, any edits I make to data files are going to show up in red, and they even show up in, if I go to one of these options here, it'll be display annotations under view. It'll actually show me, hey, this is the change I made. It tells you where you made the change and what the change ended up being. So my old value was null, and I changed it to 1, 2, 3, and it's going to show up in red. That's not the best way to end up making a data file look how you want it to look. It is possible to do it this way. And in the end, if you export it to like XPSS or Excel or anything, it's not going to show up in red ultimately, but it's a good way to track changes that are made to a data file. But in this instance, this isn't how I want my data to look. I don't want all of these null values. I don't want to have to parse through all of this. It's just, it's a little much. So let's hop back into our E' experiment. I don't want to save these changes. Let's hop back into our E' experiment and let's find out where that stim display 1 came from. So if I look through my experiment explorer here, I just kind of made it bigger so I can see it easier. There it is in my list 4. So what must have happened in this instance is when I was copying and pasting my list 4 object, I actually decided to paste all of the child objects. So I clicked yes to that prompt that came up, and that's completely fine because this is very easy to fix. To do this, all I would do is change the procedure column from trial proc 1 to just trial proc. And what it's going to temporarily do while I have a mix of both trial proc 1 and trial proc under my procedure column is it's going to have both trial proc and trial proc 1 in here. All I have to do is take this little fill handle in the bottom right hand corner here, change trial proc 1 to trial proc for all of these, and as you can see, trial proc 1 and especially my stim display 1 now shows up in my unreferenced D object section. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the unreferenced D object section, click delete all from unreferenced D object section. It's going to say that it'll destroy them forever. It's a really dramatic error message, but it's not incorrect. Once I do that, you can see that they are now completely gone from my experiment. So when I rerun this experiment, what's going to happen is that all of my data is going to show up under one column, and I'm not going to have that, field of null values that I had before. What this does is this, like I said, it kind of makes it all under one column, but it also backs up something I had mentioned in my first live stream, where if you go to the data file tab under the experiment object here, it actually reinforces this session, block, and trial structure a little more. So now our session, block, and trial structure actually has a little bit more meaning. Whereas, like I said in the last webinar, it was literally just to separate our practice from our critical trials. Now it's actually separating entire sections of trials, or as we call it in E', blocks of trials. All right, so that's all I have. That is making an IAT in E'. It seems like our stream is just a little bit early. So if anyone has any questions, would like me to go over anything else, please let me know. I'm definitely here for any Q&A that you guys would like to have. Otherwise, if you follow this little live stream from beginning to end, you should have the IAT that we may have in our experiment library. I don't really see any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream for now. If you guys do find that you have any questions, please feel free to go to support.pstnet.com. Ask us anything you'd like. We're more than happy to help. If you'd like to see a finished version of this task, just go to support.pstnet.com, log in using the sign in button in the upper right hand corner, sign into our product service and support site, and you have access to our experiment library. That's where both this IAT and all of our other experiment library files live. If I don't have any comments about other experiments you guys would like me to build, I'm just going to keep working through the experiment library for other kind of common psychological paradigms. But otherwise, thank you guys for showing up, and I hope to see you guys next week.